All right. Well, today I wanted to talk about the lonely weekends that I had when I was very overweight and balding back in college. Back in my early years of college, I had gained a significant amount of weight and was balding, and I'd even shaved my head at one point for a few months. There was one year where I was going to a university about 4 hours away from home. And this was the year where I was my heaviest with a balding grown out comb over hair. During that year, I was feeling very depressed, mainly due to my parents divorcing the previous summer. I didn't want to leave my apartment outside of going to class and working at a gas station that was down the street where I worked for a few months. The apartment I was living in was like a complete shithole, and I was living there with a good friend and his friend. The apartment was like very, very dark inside, and like we had one small couch in the living room, and then the kitchen was like very old. The bathroom was super small, very decrepit. Like it felt like every time when I was in my apartment was basically like a dungeon, specifically my room. It just felt like a dungeon, felt like I was in like prison. So all I wanted to do on Friday and Saturday nights was to sit on my laptop and watch Adam Sandler movies and episodes of Lost, Prison Break, and Law and Order SVU. Those were my favorite shows at the time, and I think honestly those are like legendary classic shows, if any of you have watched those. These binge-watching sessions would just distract me from the loneliness that I did feel at the time. There was a baseball house that was right next to my apartment that would throw parties every Friday and Saturday night, and a lot of Thursdays as well. And during the week, it wasn't too bad. I'd be working on homework in my room. Sometimes I'd hang out with my roommate, and other times I would just be chilling on my bed, watching Netflix. But what I'll say is, like, once it got to Friday nights in particular, it was just extremely depressing to be in my room binging Netflix while people would be like, the way my room was set up. My room was on like a second floor of this house, and like I could see out my window. My window was probably about 25 feet away from the baseball house. So it was like people could actually like look into my room, and I could see people pretty visibly outside. And people would be shuffling into this house all night long. People would be hanging outside in the patio and just be drinking and like living life. And I didn't have any blinds over the window. And what I would do is once the party got going, I would just shut the lights off and then watch Netflix on my laptop in the dark, just listening to people like laughing, having a good time, women shouting. And I turned off the light in my room as I didn't want people to like look up in my room, and it was just tough. And like I said, I would also be eating bags and bags of Doritos, Tostitos. I would have boxes of like those microwavable taquitos, quesadillas that I would just be binge eating for hours. And eating junk food and watching Adam Sandler movies was like probably the best escape from like my crippling loneliness at the time. Every time I would look in the mirror and like see my balding hair, big gut and double chin at the time, I just couldn't like look at myself in the eye. The worst part about it back then is like my friend at the time, he always wanted me to go out with him. And I always dreaded when he asked me. Like he would knock on my door around like 9 o'clock on like a Friday or Saturday. And, while I was watching movies and be like, yo man, let's go out, dude. Like, the frat's having a party. Like I always dreaded when he asked me, and like I said, he would knock on my door, at this time, and I would tell him no the vast majority of the time. And my friend was like that type of person that would really try not to take no for an answer. So occasionally I would just give in, and I would go with him to a party every once in a while. My buddy at the time he's a decently good looking guy, and he would bring girls back to the apartment like fairly frequently that year. He was a fairly attractive, 6 feet tall. He had hair at the time that like made him look like and still to this day that makes him look like a mix of like Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley if they had a kid. He would bring girls back from parties sometimes. Sometimes he'd bring them back from his frat house. And, while I was sitting in my room with the lights turned off, I would hear him having sex in the other room. His room was like really close to mine. And back then, that like really affected me. I was never jealous of him, but I was jealous that I wasn't having that success back then. especially during those years when I, was so overweight and I was like, dealing with balding. I was happy for him but also longed to have that. I gained such a significant amount of weight in the past year and a half that, for a long period of time, I really forgot what it was like to be in good shape and kind of feel and be treated normally by people. And that entire year, I didn't have one single woman in my room, like not one single woman, step through in my room in my apartment. And looking back, like balding was honestly worse than the weight gain, in my opinion, as I felt like I was losing my identity. And the balding comb over just looked horrible. And when my roommate did drag me to his frat, like I can tell you, like no one besides my friend and a few other of his frat buddies would even talk to me. Like I remember my friend would try to introduce me to people and people just weren't interested. Like most of the women would, had no interest in talking to me. Most of the guys, had zero interest as well, especially if you go to a frat party and you're not a member of that frat. No one really wants you to be there. So like I said, only him and maybe two other guys in this frat would even really really treat me well. I remember trying to strike up conversations with girls or people there when my buddy wasn't with me. I would either get completely ignored or just get like one word or like very quick answers. Like I said, people, when you're unattractive, people just don't want to interact with you. It's just kind of the way it is. What I would do is I would just go and play beer pong the whole night. And typically I avoided the dance area and other areas where the vast majority of the people were migrating. The reason I did this, I think it was subconscious, but I could feel like the disgust towards me from women as well as guys at the frat house. I remember trying to, like I said, strike up conversations with girls or people there, and it just would go nowhere. Like nobody wanted to talk to you. And I think the reason behind that is like when you're overweight, when you stick out, and people can see you're balding, nobody really wants to talk to you. I think it's kind of like, one, they look at you in disgust, from a physical standpoint. But I think it's also like nobody wants to be seen talking to like an unattractive guy, especially at a frat party where there's a lot of people that may be judging them and judging you at the same time. And you honestly just feel invisible. It's like you're in the room, but no one looks at you, and you honestly feel like a ghost. And when you're trying to move through a crowded area of a party, women just give you really weird looks. Kind of like the look on their face is like a mix of like disgust, confusion, and like as you kind of move past them, they just kind of give you a look of like, please do not talk to me. If anyone has ever gotten that look, they understand. After about an hour at these parties, I would always find an excuse to jut out early. I would usually say to my buddy after playing beer pong, I would go up to him and say, hey man, I'm going to grab pizza or wings, as there was a place right down the street that sold them. And sometimes he would say, yeah, I'll come with you. And then he joined me. And then there was, like I said, I would say this to get out of the party. And then, this frat house was like kind of right down the street. And I wouldn't go get pizza. I would just head back to the apartment, shut and lock my door, and just go to sleep. I did this to get out of the party, as they're just not fun when you're an unattractive guy. And I had told this story previously, but there was a party that my buddy dragged me to that was at the baseball house next door, where I had introduced myself to these two girls. And they had said, like, their initial response after I just said, hi, my name's so-and-so. The one girl said, I'm the girlfriend of Max. And the other girl said, I'm the girlfriend of Seth. Well, it turns out that neither Seth or Max had girlfriends. And I found this out because I had ran into both of them within the next week. And they were both shocked. And obviously those two girls, they said this to not just because they didn't want to continue the conversation with me. And this will happen when you're an unattractive guy. I think when people see you as an unattractive guy, they may feel disgust. They may feel like those initial, they kind of feel like, and if it's not disgust, they kind of feel awkwardness, and they don't really want to interact with you. So sometimes they'll make up things like, oh, I have a boyfriend, or I'm the boyfriend of so-and-so.
or they'll say things like, "Oh, I gotta go to the bathroom," or "I'll be right back." And that was really my experience when I went to these parties when I was very unattractive. And that's just the way it is. Honestly, it's going to be the same thing, same way 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now. And honestly, when you're perceived as being unattractive, people don't really want to be seen talking to you at these college parties unless you have some sort of status in the frat or the sports team. Like an example is if you're like a frat legend that like Jester Maxes a lot, then people may want to talk to you, but it's more of just laughing at your expense. Like occasionally I would see at these parties, I would see another like overweight, unattractive guy, and he's like, everyone's holding him up at the keg stand and people are shouting, yelling, like kind of insults and messing with them. Occasionally you'll see like an attractive guy doing like, doing like one of those beer bongs. And yeah, people are just like kind of messing with them, and I never really wanted to do that. So I just really felt out of place. And when these sort of things happen to you, when you get ignored, you get those one word answers, you get those rejections, like you'd rather just sit at home on your laptop and binge watch movies and shows than be out at some party where you're just treated like you're invisible. And I can say like sitting in my room eating junk food felt amazing and was like a temporary escape from my thoughts of my life. I know a lot of people, especially in the red pill space, they'll always point out, they always say things like, "Oh, get off your couch, like, get out there, you need to be social, you need to meet people and stop eating Cheetos and, stop watching movies and stop watching porn on your laptop." Like they'll say those things, but honestly, when you're unattractive, it's almost like people kind of force you, and not force you into doing things like that. But when you actually do try to go out and meet people when you're unattractive, people reject you. People reject that. And that's just the way it is. And at the end of the day. And, well, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like. Feel free to comment down below your experience with lonely college weekends and being dragged out to parties. And feel free to subscribe. Until next time, take care.